Hello everyone, thank you very much Professor Iqbal, and it's my pleasure to be among all of you, and this is for the first time that I will be talking on Jain political thought. Well, I have done religion and philosophy of Jainism, and I'm specialized in Jain philosophy and religion, but I had never approached Jainism from a political perspective. But I have been a student in which I'm studying political philosophy that gave me a perspective of how to seek the Jain tradition from that perspective as well. So this is my little effort to talk about Jainism from this perspective, and I'm very thankful for providing me that opportunity, Professor Iqbal. Okay, so I'll be giving you an overview of the philosophical foundation of Jainism to understand what kind of norms that Jainism will talk about, which can be consistently incorporated in its political thought. That's the idea. So if we try to understand Jainism or Jain religion, it is basically a religion of practice, and it's also a religion based on some faith, beliefs. And some of the primary beliefs or presuppositions that Jainism admits is it believes that there is soul, and it also believes that there is material force, a jiva, which it calls as a material energy, and these two energies are independent energy. The conscious energy and the material energy are the two independent energies. And these energies are natural energies. Nobody has created it. It is a beginning, from the beginningless time, these two energies exist in a natural way in this universe. It also believes in the karma theory. So there is this moral causation theory, what we in simple language call is what goes around comes around. So karma theory is nothing but a moral causal theory. So it believes in moral causation theory in the name of karma theory, like the other schools of Indian thoughts. And it also believes in liberation and rebirth. The notion of liberation and rebirth are also very strong in Jain philosophical thoughts. So after giving this a basis of what are its presuppositions, and on this philosophical foundations, it talks about the three major core principles that can be followed in our day-to-day life. And you may have heard of these three terms. Ahimsa, all of you are familiar with this term, I believe, if you are studying the Eastern traditions or the South Asian or Indian tradition. Ahimsa, translated as, no? Ahimsa? Okay. So ahimsa, how many of you don't know this term, ahimsa? Wow, wonderful. So ahimsa is translated as non-violence, the principle of non-violence. So the principle of non-violence is very central to the Jain belief system and Jain society, or the Jain religious thought. Everything that they pursue in this life is to confer with this notion of ahimsa. So it is given a very central position in Jain belief system. And Mahatma Gandhi, who initiated his whole political movement, he founded his, he made this principle of nonviolence as a foundational principles to initiate his political movement of bringing freedom to India from the British Empire. I will not go to that aspect. The second important principle that Jainism advocates is the principle of aparigraha, which is translated as non-possessiveness or non-possession, the principle of non-possession. So it also gives a strong emphasis to the principle of non-possession, which necessarily does not mean that people in Jain community are not millionaires or billionaires. Rather, 60% of the tax in the Indian society comes from the Jain community. So the principle of non-possession necessarily does not implies that one cannot be rich. Okay, but how can this richness be acquired or pursued is a different story that Jainism talks about. And the third principle is the principle of anekantavad, which is translated as the principle of relativism or the principle of non-absolutism. I want to explain each of them in a little bit of detail. So when I talk about ahimsa, translated as non-violence, it consists of three basic components. Ahimsa, the practice of ahimsa basically is fulfilled when the three important components associated with this principle are satisfied. The first principle is the principle of non-harm. The first component of the principle of ahimsa, or the principle of non-violence, is non-harm. So a practitioner of ahimsa will take all care to produce no harm or minimum harm. I say minimum harm because it is impossible to practice non-violence in absolute terms. Do you all agree? because our life is dependent on some form or the other form of violence. We cannot practice nonviolence in absolute terms, at least in relation to the first component of non-harm, because our life is dependent on other life forms. We eat food, we consume food, we use a lot of energy, bioenergy, and in that interaction, we are producing harm towards the environment or towards the other life forms. So it is impossible for us to observe the principle of ahimsa in absolute sense, but Jainism advocates that it is possible for us to minimize that violence. It is possible for us to avoid the unnecessary violence completely. Do you all agree? Can we avoid the unnecessary violence? Yes, that which is not hampering our livelihood or our well-being, we can definitely avoid that kind of violence. So it's talking about minimizing the non-violence as much as possible, as much as available, as much as we can strive to minimize violence, we should be mindful of minimizing that kind of violence. The first component, as I said, non-harm, it consists of minimizing the violence. And Jainism says that this violence can be produced at mental level as well, not only at physical level. Such a violence, such a form of harm can be produced at mental level, at a verbal level. So not simply confining our actions and our interactions with the other life forms or with the other human forms only on a physical level, but also on mental as well as on verbal level. So it brings this three category of non-harm on physical level, on mental level, and then on the verbal level. Further, it says that violence, the act of violence can be performed by an individual oneself. An individual self can indulge in the act of violence. Okay? So one should be vigilant in minimizing those kind of violence. The other situation of violence is one does not indulge directly in any form of violence, but ask others to indulge in that kind of violence. Right? So we are not directly involving any kind of violence, but we are asking others to perform the act of violence on our behalf. That's called as so the second category is basically an indirect form of violence, but it is violence. Even if somebody else is producing violence on our behalf, we are the partner of that violence or that harm. We are equally the partner of that harm. Okay, you follow these two categories. So Jainism is talking about considering all this form as violence. We cannot free ourselves that we are not directly committing, so we are not responsible. According to Jainism, we are a partner of such form of violence and we are equally responsible for that. The third important section of this very component of this subcategorization of violence, it says that we are neither committing violence, nor are we asking others to commit violence. We have nothing to do with either for self or asking others for ourselves. But if an act of violence is happening somewhere, if we become a part of appreciating that form of violence, we become the partner of that violence. So even if you are a third person and if you are appreciating we become the part of appreciating any kind of violence, we get involved in that act of violence. Do you understand what I'm saying? Right? If a movie is going on, if some violent acts are happening in a movie, and if we start enjoying that part of movie, become one with that action and that event, we become the part of that violence. So even appreciation of violence is also a participation in violence according to Jainism, if it is something violent in nature. So the first component of violence, it goes on adding types and subtypes, and it goes all to 108 types of violence. And there can be more added to that forms of violence. I just discussed few components of the types of violence that has been explained in Jain original primary sources. So these are 9 categories of violence: doing physical, mental, verbal, then self, asking others and appreciating. This is other, and their permutation and combination leads to 9 forms of violence. First component. The second important component, which I call a rather active form of nonviolence, it is considered to be self-restraint. Self-restraint is the second important act of nonviolence. So Jainism strongly advocates the principle of self-restraint. Self-restraint is not that we are trying to bring a limitation for ourselves, but we are basically exploring the horizon of compassion and love towards others. The term appears to be negative because we are restraining, but in reality, we are expanding. We are opening the doors for others. We are opening the door of compassion towards others. What happens when we self-restrain? We basically open our door of compassion towards others. We basically open the door of amity and friendliness towards others. So self-restraint, it appears to be a negative term and a negative form of action, but actually the implied meaning of self-restraint is very active force because we are magnifying our own dimension. That's the idea. Clear the aspect of self-restraint, and it can be applied. If we keep on drawing the areas of self-restraint, we can keep on continuing. It's an endless process. It is an endless journey. We can exploring all such areas in our life to practice the principle of self-restraint, which is the second important component of non-violence or ahimsa principle. I'm not going into such details. The third important component of this ahimsa practice is vigilance, apramad, the original terms that comes in this text. Apramad, that is vigilance, the practice of mindfulness. So Jainism will say that in order to be a non-violent person, do you think there is necessary to be the existence of other form of life or other being? Or we can practice non-violence just by being ourselves? What do you think? We are simple alone in this room, and do you think you can practice non-violence? Can we practice the principle of ahimsa, or we need somebody in order to practice the principle of ahimsa? What's your answer? Did you follow my question? Can non-violence be practiced when we are purely independent by ourselves? Can we practice ahimsa, non-violence? When we are by ourselves, there is nobody surrounding us, there is no any other life form. Do you think we can practice non-violence? Yeah? How? You have to justify. Go ahead.
So, you're basically saying, like, if you're by yourself, but
yeah, by yourself.
You need to eat.
Okay.
So, killing an animal, that's an act of violence. Depends on how you see it. So it's basically impossible because if you have to feed yourself.
Okay, right now I'm asking that you're not hungry, you don't need water, in this given moment, right? In this given moment, if you're alone and you are satisfied, you had your food, you have your water, everything is okay, and you're by yourself alone, single in this room, can you still practice or observe the principle of non-violence?
Yeah, because you can be violent towards yourself, or like in your nature.
Wonderful. Got the idea? You can be violent toward yourself. What could be that? A negative thought can creep, right? Nobody is here. We can have a negative memory. But I will say that negative memory is also you're bringing someone in your memory. Right? You're bringing someone in your memory. So my point is, can you be nonviolent when you're by yourself only, no other even in your memory? She pretty much answered my question. She said that you can be violent toward yourself. Right? But I introduced the word. Can you defend your point a little bit more? You can be violent toward yourself. How will you explain that?
I mean, you could, yeah, even by yourself, even if you have no one in your memory, you could still look at yourself a certain way. Like to look at yourself in the mirror and be negative towards yourself without.
Beautiful, beautiful. So when you are negative towards yourself, you have nobody, right? But you can be negative toward yourself, and that will be a form of violence. That will be a form of violence. And Jainism also brings that when you're not aware of that moment, not only that you are thinking of yourself and you're putting yourself in past memory and criticizing yourself, but even in that given moment, if we are not mindful, Jainism say that we can, the principle of mindfulness is dismissed in that moment. And whenever the principle of mindfulness or vigilance is dismissed, we indulge in the form of violence. Did you follow my point? Right? So mindfulness is so important and accepted as a principle of ahimsa, which is not usually understood in general terms. We just understand the principle of non-harm as a principle of ahimsa, but when we try to go into the deeper analysis of this notion of ahimsa, these three principles are very important in Jainism, three important components. The component of non-harm, all those categories, physical, mental, emotional, and then done by self and not repeating again. The second important component is self-restraint. How can we restrain our actions, our emotions, our desires? All this come into the component of self-restraint. Our actions towards others, our actions towards ourselves, all this category will come into the second component of self-restraint. Okay? And the third one is vigilance. The principle of mindfulness is also an important component of the practice of ahimsa. So all have to go together in order to flourish this beautiful principle called as non-harm. It is not simply confined to physical harm. It goes all the way towards the principle of our being mindful towards our own virtues. And Jainism says that inherently we all are good beings. We have that because the soul is pure. It is only because of the interaction with material energy that it becomes impure. Otherwise, our true nature, our true self is pure self, and it is always pure. If our self is pure, if we are mindful of that self and consciousness, we are in our true nature, and we cannot be violent in that nature. It is only when we forget, when we are out of our conscious energy, when we are not mindful of our energy, we get trapped with this energy, which can be called as ahimsa or violence. Okay, any question about the principle or the component of nonviolence, ahimsa? I think I clarified ahimsa. Okay, let me bring one example of vigilance that is available in the text. So Jainism also have this strong notion of asceticism, practice of asceticism. So an ascetic is required to be vigilant every moment. While he's walking, standing, eating, he or she walking or eating or anything, any activity has to be mindfully performed. So suppose a monk has to go from this room to the other room, and he walks from this room to the other room. Okay? There was no harm, physical harm produced during that action of walking. But a monk can still be considered as performing an action of ahimsa, or his action can be considered as violent action if the monk is not mindful of that action. Got the point? So there is no harm. There was no harm produced in the action of walking from this room to other room. But if the monk was not mindful in his action, that action is considered to be an action of ahimsa. So it gives the importance of the third component, how important the third component is in order to practice, in order to fulfill the requirement of being a ahimsak individual or a practitioner of ahimsa. This is one example. We have many such examples explaining the different situation and how can an individual be considered to be can the action be considered to be a violent action or a non-violent action? Okay? Any question to this example? Do you have any question about this example? Why do you think it is put into the category of ahimsa? This can be for your homework, okay? You can think on it, reflect on it. Let me go to the second principle, aparigraha. As I translated, it is non-possessiveness, and it is also non-possession. Well, we have a body, we have life, we need certain possession. So what is this aparigraha, non-possession? It looks to be a very ideal principle, but according to Jainism, the principle is again used as an ichcha parinam, which means translated as limiting desires. So the implied meaning of non-possession, it doesn't say that don't possess anything, but don't have a possessive instinct, which is indirectly an instinct of attachment. An instinct of attachment. We can have very limited things, but if we are super attached to those things, we are basically a person of parigraha, that is, we are a person having possession. A little thing can occupy our complete mind, right? And so possession has to do with the possessive instinct. It also has to do with the possession of material objects. So Jainism will recommend or advocate the principle that use objects. It doesn't ask not to use objects, but use as is required, as is necessary, as much as is necessary. Each individual may have different necessities based on one's own life and life structures in which one are living, but we can always try to broom our requirements, and we can cut off the requirements if those are not necessary. How many of you think that you have things which are not necessary with you? Just reflect on the things or objects you have with you, and you think that many of them are not necessary with you. Right? And how many of you will say that I have only necessary things with me which I appropriately use? Beautiful. So we can have examples. There is no absence of example. We can have. So if we can reflect on those things, that the things which are necessary and inevitable for my life living and the structure in which I am living, it is well and good. You can keep it. It's not unnecessary that you should not keep it. But if something we are having and we are hoarding things which is not necessary, Jainism will say that this will be the part of parigraha, which is we are violating the principle of aparigraha according to Jainism. The third principle is the principle of anekantavad, the principle of non-absolutism, are also translated as the principle of relativity. So Jainism says that truth is relative. Truth is not absolute. Reality is relative, or truth is relative. Let me bring a beautiful example, classical example from the Jain text itself. An elephant, okay? You may have heard this example. It is available in many traditions, and this is very prominently available even in Jain traditions to explain this principle of non-absolutism. Suppose there is an elephant in the room, okay? And we all have a band on our eyes, and we had never seen an elephant. And we all are asked to explain what an elephant is. We will go and touch the elephant. Some may touch the stomach and feel that it is something like a wall. Some may touch the leg of an elephant and feel it is like a pillar. Some may touch the tail and may feel it's just like a rope. Some may touch the ear and feel that it's something like a fan, right? We all will have different perspectives. Some may touch the trunk and have a different idea about an elephant. We all come back, and now we are asked to explain what an elephant is. We all have different answers, correct? We all will have different answers. Which answer is right? Or which answer is wrong? Which answer is right? Now, first question. We have different perspectives about the elephant. Which of the answer is right?
I think they're all right.
They all are right. Beautiful. Now my question is, when will our answer become wrong?
When you go against the other person?
Beautiful. As soon, all our perspectives are partial truth, right? They're not complete truth about an elephant. Agreed? So according to Jainism, reality or truth is always prospectively achieved. It becomes wrong only when we try to claim the partial truth as the absolute truth, which means when we attempt to deny others' perspective, we are gone. Even our truth, which was a partial truth, becomes incorrect. Make sense? So according to the principle of non-absolutism, truth is infinite. Truth is multiform. It has multiforms. We cannot talk about truth in absolute terms. Once we try to picture the truth, the partial truth, once we try to put our position in making a claim about the absolute truth of reality, we are gone. Because we are basically disregarding the other aspects of the truth, which are equally true. The other partial truths are all equally true principles. So this is the principle of anekantavad. So we see that the principles of ahimsa, aparigraha, and anekantavad are the principles which try to bring purity in individual, but I also find that these are the principles which can bring purity in social societies and in structures in which we live. The principle of non-possession, the principle of anekantavad has very much to do with the social well-being, not simply individual well-being. So also the principle of ahimsa. They appear to be very individualistic in nature, but they are also very powerful in bringing in establishing a peaceful society, in establishing a just and fair society. This is how I look to these principles. Okay? The point is, where do we begin? How do we begin it? We can begin them on an individualistic level. We can start this practice on our individual life. We can begin that practice, and if all of us choose to practice on an individual level, what do you think will be the kind of structure we develop? The structure will be, if we all start practicing this kind of principle, what kind of social structure will we have? What will be the structure of our economics? What will be the structure of our political world or our social world?
We wouldn't have one.
Sorry?
We wouldn't have one.
We wouldn't have one?
Yeah, we wouldn't have an economy, I guess.
You wouldn't have an economy, you guess? Well, we are beings, we need objects, we need exchange. We cannot produce everything by ourselves. Some form of economics will be required because we all will be interdependent still. We are not individuals, we are all interdependent beings. We are dependent on nature, if not on human beings. Okay, let us see how this principle can become very significant. Now I want to go to the foundation of the core principles that we have discussed. We discussed these three principles, which are the principle of practice. So where does this principle stems from, or when can they become correct? The foundation of these three core principles, I believe, comes from the principle of samatha in Jainism, which is very little discussed, hardly discussed. Jainism is very popular in the name of ahimsa, but the notion of samatha is very hardly discussed. And samatha is translated usually as equanimity. And if I go to the etymological understanding of this term sam, it comes from the Sanskrit root sam, which have three meanings. Okay? The first is equanimity. The first sam, in Sanskrit we have three sam. Let me show you. Do we have a marker I saw here? Okay, this is one sam, equanimity. The other one is sham. I'm using this diacritical marks because it's Sanskrit origin, okay? Peace. And the third one is sham, S dot. So this is equanimity, peace, and industrious. This is sa, Sanskrit sa, this is sh, and this is sh. So we have this three S in Sanskrit. So what kind of equanimity does it talks about? This term samatha, they say that these three principles of ahimsa, anekant, and aparigraha stems from this samatha. And samatha consists of these three things. They can be justified when they are coming from this basic quality or from this basic virtue of equanimity. And this equanimity can also means peace. If we are practicing ahimsa from the foundation of samatha, the practice of ahimsa will be real ahimsa. In the society, there can be no harm, but there can be stress. There can be absolute, people may be following rules, but maybe they are not happy. Do you understand what I'm saying? So why it does happen? We may follow all the rules, we may not violate any of the rules or principles of the society or of the state. We are fulfilling those rules, but maybe we are not happy. So just fulfilling our norms or just absence of violence is not, according to Jainism, a peaceful state. A peaceful state has to stem from the virtue of samatha. When it stems from the virtue of samatha, which consists of equanimity, when it stems from the core peace, when these principles of possession, if we are asked to limit our objects with force, do you think there will be peace? No, if you voluntarily give up them, right? So it is not force which can bring peace in the society or in the economic structures. It has to come from this core principle of samatha, from the virtue of equanimity. When these three core principles of ahimsa, that is non-violence, non-possession, and non-absolutism, stems from this virtue of samatha, only then there can be harmony. That's the idea. Did you follow the foundation of these three principles? So three principles has nothing to do with the law that can be introduced by force, no. If they get introduced by force, it cannot bring peace. It cannot bring harmony. It cannot bring peaceful existence. It can bring a society with a well-structured laws and rules, but not peace. That's the idea. So they say that this virtue has to stem from the basic root of equanimity, which is having three etymological meaning, which means it should stem from the principle of equanimity, or it should stem from the principle of peace, the inherent peace, or it should stem from the basic idea of we all being industrious. When we trust in working, in putting our effort, not just in isolation that we choose this principle. We make a conscious effort. So being industrious is to be a conscious effort to practice them. If we are just following because there are rules and we have to follow according to Jainism, that will not be satisfying the core three practices. So they have to stem from this core principle or this virtue of samatha. Did you follow what difference it makes if we don't introduce this principle and just talk about the core three principles? I try to make the difference. If you follow just these three without understanding this, well, that may not be a complete picture of Jain notion of peace or equanimity. It could be good principle for practice, and it could be a good thing that can bring a little bit of good structure in the society, but in reality, it may not flourish peace or harmony or stresslessness in the society. It has to stem from this virtue of samatha. That's the idea. Now let us see. So now I want to just, from this principle of samatha, I want to switch to the political idea as well. So when I say samatha, equanimity, it has to be on two levels. Okay, this equanimity, this virtue, this samatha has to flourish on two levels. It has to flourish on individualistic level, and it has to flourish on what level? Structural level. It has to come on both the levels. What does that mean? So equanimity, we all as individuals should have this virtue of equanimity within us, number first. What do you think if we are equanimity in ourselves, but if the structure is not good, can we be a good person? Yes or no? Can we be? Yes, we cannot. It's difficult because we don't have a structure, we don't have a system in which we can be moral, in which we can function in a way which can allow our samatha to flourish. The social setting could be such in which our being virtue may not work. So Jainism will say that the samatha, the equanimity has to come on two levels. Just on individualistic level is not going to satisfy the equanimity level in the society. It has to come on both the levels, on an individualistic level as well as on a structural level or on a system level. So my question is, what will be the equanimity in a structural level? And what will be the equanimity in an individual level? How do you distinguish? Okay, let us go first to the individual level. This is a little bit easy because you have learned the principles of being what are, as an individual, how we can be peace. What could be the principle of equanimity on individualistic level? Any principles you want to pull? Any virtues you feel that, yes, these are principles which shows compassion or love or...
You mentioned before detaching from the worldly possessions.
Detaching from worldly possessions.
Charity.
Sorry?
Charity.
Charity. So you want to share, beautiful. These are the principle of equanimity. You want to be equal with all, right? When you are renouncing the possession, you want to bring that there can be balance in the society, right? So your individual, you start beginning, start taking steps on an individualistic level. What other steps can we take to flourish this principle of equanimity, to grow equanimously? Keep yourself mindful. Once we are mindful, we will avoid unnecessary things. Naturally, we will avoid. The rule of mindfulness is it will not allow any unnecessary things to be associated with us. Once we become mindful, we will feel that unnecessary will naturally get kept aside. Any other principles you want to bring of equanimity on an individual level? Beautiful. I'm very happy you got. Yeah. Good karma, so good action, any action which is good on a physical level, on a mental level, or on a verbal level. Make sense of what we are discussing? I think it's making sense, right? So on an individualistic level, we can flourish this virtue of equanimity if it has been obscured because of any reasons, but we can put our effort, we can be vigilant, and we can nurture our quality of samatha, that is equanimity within us, through these very small little steps, what we just came up in the class. Now, my next question is, how can we practice that on structural level?
Holding other people accountable.
Holding other people accountable. Very beautiful. So now we are coming in a bigger picture, not just we are confining to ourselves, we are thinking of others. We are thinking of others. Okay, let me go, how we can talk about this on a structural level. Okay.
So we have 10 minutes.
10 more minutes? Okay, so I discussed 2 points and then, so what is justice? What is justice? Just society. In a political background, we want to talk about justice. So what is justice? One of the important quotations that come in the primary sources of Jainism is Ekka Manusai, human race is one. Not only that, it says human race is one, but it goes further and says that all life forms are equal. Because I'm confining myself to the political picture, political thought, I'm not going to the other life forms. So basically, Jainism talks about all life forms are equal. Everybody's life is equally valuable. Whether it is least developed, whether it is a highly developed being, every life form is equally important. And once we introduce this principle of ekka manusai jai, that is all life, human race is one, it means treat everybody as equal. Everybody should have free choice to make in this society. Everybody should have that freedom, that liberty to make choices about their own life, about their religion, about their well-being, about their education. If they get all those opportunities in the society, we call that to be a just society. Is it not? And if somebody are deprived of those opportunities, that setting is not a just society. The society in which everybody have opportunity to flourish and to make choices about their life, such a society will be called as a just society. But we know that we have some inherent differences. Even if we are twins, we have certain differences. If we are born twins, we have certain differences. So this is also a reality that there is some kind of inequality inherently exists. Is it not? Right? We are not talking about structural differences, but even inherent differences, we have some differences which exist in the society. So we are born unequal in certain respect. But despite being unequal in certain respect, Jainism will say that we cannot, based on these differences, create an unjust society. We should always look for justice in the society or fairness in the society. And justice, according to Jainism, will then consist, when they say that a human race is one, they are basically saying that we all are equal, despite our our inherent differences. And that will propose the idea that we should have a system or a structure in the society which provides just and equal rights and opportunities to every individual of a society. And where will that stem from? Because we have a little time, I go to one important point, and then and we'll go back to the final quotation of Acharya Mahapragya. So in order to understand justice, we also have to understand what is then injustice. In order to bring justice in the society, in order to bring samatha on a structural level, we have to see that what is injustice. What could be injustice? Asamvibhagu nahutasya mukho. This is another quotation from other different book where they say that there can be injustice in the society when the minimum which is required is not given to the people of the society. It means everybody should have their share. Everybody should have their share. This comes in a religious context where they say that liberation, that is moksha, is unavailable to people who discriminates. So I am putting this very quotation in a structural setting and say that if somebody is not given their respective share, such a society will be an unjust society, and such an action will be considered to be an injustice towards that individual. Make sense? Everybody should have their share in the society, even the least, who are in the least form of development or least form of opportunity should also have their own equal share. So I talked about these two foundations in which a just society can be conceived, and I want to quote Acharya Mahapragya, who introduced his notion of relative economics in order to bring a well-being on a structural level. And he says that in order to have a just society or a political structure be good, we have to have a two-way approach of growth from individual to the system. So this is a very beautiful quotation. He says that the foundation of peace is a just system. We cannot think of peace without a just system. We should have a just system. The foundation of just system is peaceful coexistence. All people, all individuals in the society should be living in a peaceful coexistence form despite their differences. The third is the foundation of peaceful coexistence is harmony. We can exist peacefully because we are in harmony. We are interdependent. We understand each other and we respect each other and we live in harmony. And the foundation of harmony is truth. That harmony will come because we are all truthful. We don't want to deceive ourselves or we don't want to deceive others. When our foundation is truth, there will be harmony. And the foundation of truth is fearlessness. We will be truthful when we are fearless. We are not afraid of our lives or our families because we consider the whole family, the whole universe to be our family. We will expand that heart towards everybody. So we can be truthful when we are fearless. And the foundation of fearlessness is ahimsa. We can be fearless only when we develop all the components of nonviolence within us. And the foundation of nonviolence is non-possession. And the foundation of non-possession is self-restraint. So the journey has to begin from both the way. There has to be two-way approach in order to bring a just society. We cannot think that if the system says, if all the systems will be equal and just, there will be peace in the society. No. Jainism will say that even individuals have to cultivate the principles of self-restraint, non-possession, and non-violence in order to achieve the just society. So many efforts have been made to make the societies just, but still there is unrest, there is absence of peace, there are wars in the societies, because the approach, the correction or the rectification has to come on both the levels, on individual level and on the structural level. If it is one-way approach, if our whole effort is to improve the system, and if we ignore the individualistic growth, there cannot be justice or peace in the society. And if we simply focus on self-restraint and non-violence practice and ignore unjust system, we cannot establish either peace. It has to be a balanced approach of improving or bringing peace in the system, and also bringing peace and nourishment in individualistic spiritual growth. When they both unite, that we can conceive of a just society. So I have tried to bring these two principles. Thank you very much. I think I tried to explain. If you have any questions, can we take a few questions? Yeah. Go ahead. If you have any questions.
Was there an aspect that, like what you described, that was hardest for you to understand or to live by?
No, I try. Yeah. I think if we are mindful and if we can, it has become a part of my life. So I feel that, no, this is doable. It's not hard. In beginning, maybe it's a little bit hard in different respect. And I don't say that now I'm mature enough. Even I have to grow more. So there is no end point to that. We have to grow every day, because sometimes we don't see others. We don't see other problems. We don't understand other perspectives. But when we talk, when we interact, when we take dialogue, they open new perspectives for us, and we again reform ourselves. So that is open always, and it's a lifelong journey, I believe. Yeah, and I feel it is doable if we are open in our mind, and if we can see others and look others and also evaluate ourselves, we can always grow, and it can be very easy to grow. Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
What societies do you think in the world today are approaching these ideas? Which ones are doing a better job of?
I will say that all of them are trying in their own sphere. All of them. Like ahimsa, I see that in America they are young people having a strong movement of veganism, right? So ahimsa was given like 1,000 years, 5,000 years back, this principle, but I see that people are becoming very aware even in this state, where they don't have this culture of being vegetarian by birth. Like in Jain, if you ask, are you vegetarian? They will say that what kind of question is, because they are by birth vegetarians. Right? I came in my first class in the first semester, and one of my students asked, you are practicing vegetarian since when? I was astonished. I said, I'm Jain and I'm by birth vegetarian. So it was a tough question for me. But so they are bringing this consciousness. This generation is bringing that awareness. So I feel that every society is, as they keep on learning, as they keep on educating themselves, and as they are open and they see everything that is going around, they want to bring change. Every society is trying to bring change. Yeah, this is how I understand. It's not that only people who have a strong religious background. No, they come up with a different frame. They don't have a religious background, but still they have a very strong notion of veganism. They have a very strong, I talked about aparigraha. You have a very strong movement that I heard about minimalism.
Yeah.
It is aparigraha, right? You want to do your thing, objects minimize. Because science has proved that objects are creating stress. The more you keep the object, the more stress it produces. It creates the energy which produces stress in us. So they are bringing up the idea. Once the truth is revealed, everybody wants to bring the transformation, I believe. Yeah.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.